Hello, thank you so much for joining me again and welcome back to this channel. So last time I covered a little bit around this channel, an introduction to who I am, a little bit around why I've decided to take a sabbatical in my career, and also touched on 3 things to do if you're feeling in a little bit of a career rut. Today, I wanted to talk a bit more around structure. And particularly, I wanted to talk about some of the changes that you go through when you've been working for a company to when you're suddenly working for yourself. And that is what on this sabbatical I'm doing. And I want to also, as well as touch on some of those differences and particularly reflecting on how I'm finding it so far, I then want to talk a little bit around tips to stay productive, particularly if you're working for yourself. But I think some of those tips are also going to be relevant for wherever you're working, whether it's on your own, whether it's in a company, whether it's as a contractor, whatever it may be. So how am I finding it so far? Well, overall, I would say I'm really enjoying it. But there are 3 big areas that I've noticed in terms of structure and working for yourself. Firstly, the fact that tasks are pretty much set by you. Secondly, your schedule is set by you. And thirdly, and this is the really big one I found, accountability is you. Like, you hold yourself to account. And that is a really, really big adjustment from working in a company and working with a team, because I found when I was in that environment, I held myself to account, but I also knew I had managers on the project to hold me to account. I had my team to hold me to account. Like, if I didn't do something, people are gonna know. Whereas all of a sudden, the accountability is me and I'm accountable to myself. And that is a very strange feeling. And I think for some people it may not work. I'm definitely adjusting to it, but it's strange, right? And I'm going to come on to a little bit more around why it's a little bit strange. But something that has really helped me so far, and I must say at the time of recording this video, by the way, it's probably about 3 weeks into my sabbatical, so still quite early on. I would say that something that's really helped is having a little bit of a calendar view every day, what I'm working on that is leading towards the bigger goals for that week. And that I find very, very helpful. I've kind of made it a little bit funky with colors, etc., which you don't have to do. But that allows me to look at my day ahead, the days ahead in the week, and kind of know what tasks I have coming up and what I need to do. And I definitely feel a sense of guilt if I don't actually do those tasks. I think reflecting so far, the thing that I really miss the most is my lunch break. I don't just mean a lunch break, like I still have a lunch break now, but specifically what I mean is when you are with a team and when you're working with a company, I found that my lunch break was so much fun. I would go with my colleagues, I'd go sit somewhere, we'd chat about anything and everything. Not always, but it was a lot of fun, and it was something that I looked forward to in the day. Whereas now, my lunch break, it's not so social, and that is something that I'm missing. And I said in the first episode of this channel that I really wanted to make sure that what I say to you is an honest view, and I will say that that is something that I definitely feel I'm missing out on at the moment. So I want to talk now about the good and the bad to having your own structure or working for yourself. And maybe this will be helpful for some people looking at this, thinking that they also want to go on a sabbatical and work on some of their own projects. Or maybe you're watching this and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go freelance. Or you know what, I'm going to become a contractor, or I'm going to set up my own business, whatever it might be. What are some of the good things and the bad things in terms of having your own structure? I'm going to start off with the bad. So the bad, firstly, there's a temptation to just keep working. Now, some of you may be surprised by this, but when you're doing stuff that you love and you're doing it on your own terms and your own accord, there is a temptation to just keep going. And I remember, I think it was last week, Friday, it was like 8 p.m. And I was just doing stuff and I was like, Naluka, you need to stop and have some dinner. And the funny thing is, normally Friday 8 p.m. I would definitely not be working. So there is a temptation to just keep going, particularly if you're loving what you're doing or you're really enjoying whatever it is you're working on. Then there's no one around you to say, hang on, what are you still doing online? Like if I was still online at 8 p.m. on a Friday and I could see that everyone else was offline, I'd feel a bit weird about it. But because it's just me on my own, I'll just keep going. So that's probably one of the bad things. But the second bad thing on the flip side is that, or rather kind of second to that, is that there's also a temptation to sometimes not work because there's no one to hold you to account. So if you get up one morning and you're like, don't really feel like working today or don't really feel in the mood, then technically you don't have to work. And that is also not ideal. So it's kind of strange. It's like there's a temptation to keep working and yet there's also a temptation sometimes to not work at all. And you've really got to watch that and you've got to be careful of those. The third bad thing is that there is a greater risk, I think, to being less productive because you're setting your schedule, you're setting your tasks, you're setting your goals. So why not go take a 2.5 lunch break and walk? And just let the day drag out. And so you've got to be really, really disciplined on yourself, I found, to stay focused and to make sure that you don't just let everything drag out because you will be less productive. But there's also a lot of good in terms of having your own structure. So one of the first things that I found is that I have much more greater flexibility in my day. So whereas before I kind of had quite a strict lunch hour break and it was quite difficult to do things outside of that because you'll have meetings or you'll be expected to be back online. Now, if I want to just go and take a Pilates class at like 3 till 4, I can go and do that. And I think that's really nice to have that flexibility in the day. The second good thing is that I found that meetings that I am having with other people that are work related are a lot more set by me. And this is the fact that I probably have more free time than before, the fact that I'm interacting with fewer people than before if you're in a big organization. But that has been so nice to not feel like you're being owned by your diary and all the meetings that are coming through. And another really good thing that other people who are working for themselves have told me is that you can decide when you work based on when you're most productive. So for some people I know, and I have one friend I'm talking about in particular who he's a founder of his own company, he doesn't start work until like 11 a.m. because he's just such a night owl and he'll go on later. So he just sets that schedule for himself. Whereas if you were working for an organization and you logged on at 11 a.m., most people would be like, where have you been this morning? So everyone works differently. Everyone has their most productive hours. And I think if you work for yourself, it's much easier to find those hours and to work when you want. Okay, so that's a little bit around the good and the bad of what I have experienced so far in terms of having your own structure and setting your own routine. But I want to turn now to how do you stay productive and how do you stay motivated when you're working for yourself? I've got 5 key tips that I want to share with you very quickly now. The first is to make sure that you set goals and you track those goals. It can be weekly goals, it can be monthly goals, but you need to have some goals because otherwise you're going to feel like you don't have a direction. We set goals when we're in a company, and I think if you're working for yourself or you're doing your own thing, you need to also set goals. Number 2 is to use checklists. I love a checklist. I have so many checklists. At the weekend, okay, this is a massive overshare, but at the weekend I will sometimes have checklists saying, do laundry, go to shops, because I just love the satisfaction of ticking it off. But have checklists because your checklist will break down whatever those goals are into smaller components. So I found that's really, really helpful. Third tip is to make sure you reward yourself. So just like if you're working for a company, you would go and maybe have dinner one Thursday with friends. It's no different. Make sure you reward yourself and you have things in your week to look forward to. Just because you're working for yourself doesn't mean that those things go out the window. Number 4 is to use techniques to discipline yourself from distractions, because distractions I found are often bigger if you're working for yourself and you're also remote. So I love to use an app called Flipped. My friend recommended it to me, and it allows you to just say, I'm going to do 45 minutes, no phone time. And it will almost reward you and give you goals, and it's a little bit like gamification on the app. But if you work well with that, I'd really recommend it, because it prevents you from being distracted by your phone, which, let's face it, is probably a huge distraction for most of us these days. But whatever it is, whether it's using an app like that or other techniques, make sure you think about what your biggest distractions are and what you can do to prevent them kind of consuming you. And by the way, I think that's also important, whether you're working on your own or whether you're working for an organization. And the last one is to schedule in social time. So this tip really is more for people who are working on their own or for themselves, because it can be lonely. And something I remember seeing, particularly around digital nomads, is that yes, it's amazing, and yes, there's this great perception, but actually digital nomads can be really lonely at times, because you don't have your team, you don't have the people around you. And I have found I've had to be very proactive in making sure I have social time in my week, because otherwise I think I would be much more lonely than I was previously before my sabbatical. So those are the 5 tips to consider. Set goals, have checklists, reward yourself, make sure you prevent yourself from getting distracted, and schedule in social time. So overall, I'm definitely enjoying it so far. The adjustment hasn't been quite as big as I thought it was going to be in terms of hours, and I think that's because I've tried to stay really disciplined with making sure I'm kind of working by 9 and finishing by about 6-ish. But I am noticing that I don't have my team around me. Will the novelty of it wear off? Potentially. There's definitely pros and cons to owning your own structure, which I spoke about earlier. But it's definitely a freeing feeling. But I think it's not for everyone. So if you're someone considering maybe working for yourself for a little bit, or going on sabbatical and just working on some of your own projects for a bit, but you are someone who really likes to be told what to do, and you really like to have things set for you that you just follow, it's going to be, I think, much harder than if you're someone who loves to just set their own tasks and is very, very self-motivated and very proactive, because then I think this lifestyle really will work for you and appeal to you. But you do need to put things in place to stay productive, to stay motivated. And that self-discipline is really, really important. So thank you so much. I hope that was an interesting insight into routines, structure, your day, the pros and cons of working for yourself and going from an organization where you have a team to suddenly being on your own. As I say, there are good things, there are less good things, and there are things that you need to do to make sure that you stay productive. So I hope that was helpful, and I will see you back here next time.